Hello. Funny how love is unconditional, until money gets involved. My wife used to say she loved me for who I was, not for what I had. But the moment I pretended to become a millionaire, she suddenly loved me even more. I wasn't always cynical about marriage. I used to believe in love, in partnership, in the whole ride or die thing. I thought my wife, Emily, was my best friend, the kind of woman who would stick with me no matter what. We had been married for 6 years, and while things weren't perfect, I never suspected that the only thing holding us together was money. I make decent cash. Nothing outrageous, enough for a comfortable life. Emily, on the other hand, had expensive tastes. Designer bags, spa weekends, luxury brunches with her friends who all conveniently had financially stable husbands. She would always joke about how one day we'll be filthy rich, and I always laughed it off, thinking it was just small talk. Turns out, it wasn't a joke. It was a test. The signs had been there for a while. The way she dismissed the idea of traveling cheap. The way she always had an excuse whenever I suggested saving money instead of spending it. The way she lit up whenever one of her friends got a raise or married into wealth. But I ignored it. I told myself she was just ambitious. Then I started noticing the changes. The distant attitude. The always busy schedule. The fact that she suddenly had a new friend she never introduced me to. I had a feeling something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. After all, what kind of idiot wants to prove his wife is a gold digger? Then fate, or maybe just dumb luck, handed me the perfect opportunity. A distant relative I barely remembered passed away, and while I knew I wasn't in his will, I casually mentioned to Emily that he had been insanely rich. I didn't think much of it, but later that night, she sat up in bed, suddenly interested. Wait, how rich are we talking? That was the moment I knew. She wasn't thinking about the man who died. She was thinking about the money he might have left behind. And just like that, a plan started forming in my head. I decided to test her. I told her my distant uncle had left me a massive inheritance. Not just a few thousand. No, I went all out. I made it sound like I had just become a multimillionaire overnight. The transformation was instant. The cold, distant wife I had been dealing with for months? Gone. Replaced by a woman who suddenly wanted to cuddle, who suddenly missed me during the day, who suddenly couldn't wait to plan our future. It was almost too easy. She thought she had won the lottery. But what she didn't know was that this was just the beginning of the game. They say money changes people. But what they don't tell you is that it doesn't change them. It just reveals who they really are. My wife spent years pretending to love me for me. The second she thought I was rich, she turned into someone I didn't even recognize. I knew my plan was risky. It wasn't every day that a guy tests whether his wife is a gold-digging opportunist, but once the idea took root in my brain, I couldn't shake it. I had to know. Because if Emily loved me only when she thought I was rolling in cash, then what kind of love was that, really? I started small. The first night after I broke the news about my fake inheritance, Emily tried to play it cool. She nodded, lips pressed together in what I now recognize as calculated enthusiasm. Then, just as I was about to fall asleep, she casually threw in, "So, have you thought about what you'll do with all that money?" That's when I knew. A normal person, a wife who actually loved me, would be in shock, asking how I felt about suddenly coming into a fortune, whether I was overwhelmed, whether I needed time to process it. Not Emily. She skipped the emotional part and went straight to the spending. I acted clueless, shrugging. I don't know. I guess I'll just keep things the same for now. She hated that answer. The next morning, the transformation began. For months, I had been dealing with a distant, distracted wife. One who suddenly always had plans without me, who seemed uninterested in our conversations, who rarely showed any affection. But overnight, that all changed. Emily woke up before me, which never happened. She made breakfast, something she hadn't done in years. I walked into the kitchen to find fresh coffee, pancakes, eggs, bacon. The kind of meal she usually only made when she wanted to impress house guests. She kissed me on the cheek, smiling in a way that felt rehearsed. "I just wanted to do something nice for you, babe." Right. Because suddenly, I was worth being nice to. That day, I decided to test her further. I told her that the inheritance money hadn't hit my account yet because of legal paperwork. I wanted to see if her behavior would stick or if she'd start losing patience. She passed that test. She didn't push yet, but the gears in her head were turning. I could see it. 2 days later, she started dropping hints. First, it was the subtle comments about people we knew who had leveled up their lives. Did you see what Derek and Lisa did? They finally upgraded to a Tesla. I mean, if I had the money, I'd get one too. I read that flying first class actually makes travel so much healthier. Imagine never being cramped in coach again. Then, she started dreaming out loud. You know, babe, I always imagined us living in one of those modern houses with floor-to-ceiling windows and a heated pool. It's funny, I was looking at some new designer bags today, just for fun. I mean, I wouldn't actually buy one unless we could really afford it. The psychology of it was fascinating. She never asked for anything outright, because that would make her seem greedy. Instead, she planted the ideas in my head, hoping I'd be the one to offer. She was playing the long game. I started planting my own seeds. I casually mentioned not wanting to change my lifestyle too much. I told her I liked our house, that I didn't see the point in upgrading my car. Emily's smile twitched whenever I said things like that, but she kept up the act. I could tell she was waiting for the moment when the money actually arrived. That's when I'd see her true colors. So I decided to speed things up. I told her my lawyer had fast-tracked the inheritance and that I'd have access to my millions within the next week. I even booked a meeting with a financial advisor to discuss my options. That night, Emily put on lingerie she hadn't touched in years. She was suddenly the most affectionate wife on the planet. She wanted to cuddle on the couch, wanted to talk about our future, wanted to tell me how proud she was of me. It was so fake I almost laughed. She thought she was winning. She had no idea that her game was almost over. Emily thought she had me exactly where she wanted. The transformation was nearly instantaneous. My cold, distant wife had become the perfect, doting partner overnight. It was almost impressive how effortlessly she played the role of the loving, devoted spouse. But to me, it wasn't love. It was an audition. She was rehearsing for the role of a wealthy man's wife, perfecting her lines, making sure her performance would earn her a starring role in the luxurious life she had always craved. I decided to give her what she wanted, a taste. If she was so eager to live the high life, then I'd let her think she was already in it. Over the next few days, I played the part of the newly rich man. I started coming home with expensive gifts, things she had only ever dreamed of. A designer bag? No problem. A diamond bracelet? Why not? Every time I handed her something, her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not with love. Not with appreciation. With greed. She started getting bold. She suggested renovating the house, talking about how we deserved something grander. She wasn't just thinking about a new car. She was building a collection in her head. Something classy for every day, something flashy for special events, and maybe even a sports car, just for fun. The speed at which she designed her fantasy lifestyle was astonishing. It wasn't just about spending money. It was about proving to everyone else that she had arrived. Then came the friends. Suddenly, Emily wanted to host dinners, gatherings, small get-togethers that looked more like networking events than casual nights in. Women she used to roll her eyes at were now her best friends. She wanted to impress them, show them that she had married a man worth envying. She even made comments about how different things would be now that we were moving up in the world. The real kicker came when she started treating me differently. She wasn't just affectionate. She was strategic. If I was at my computer working, she'd wrap her arms around me and whisper, "You work too hard, babe. You should enjoy life more now." If I mentioned anything about being careful with finances, she'd laugh it off and say, "What's the point of money if we don't enjoy it?" She was laying the groundwork. The night it all came together was when she mentioned investments. We were lying in bed, and she started talking about smart financial moves. She had been reading about how men who come into sudden wealth should protect themselves. That's when she dropped the bomb. Some men even set up private accounts, just in case. You know, like a backup plan. Smart, right? I almost laughed out loud. She wasn't just spending the imaginary money. I could tell she was planning her exit strategy. She was positioning herself to walk away with as much as she could if things ever went south. And that's when I knew. She was going to leave me. Not yet. Not today. But one day, when she felt like she had secured enough, when she felt comfortable enough to abandon me without sacrificing the lifestyle, she was going to cash out. That's when I decided it was time for my next move. I told her I was going to finalize the transfer of my inheritance into our joint accounts. I even made a big show of telling her I was seeing my lawyer the next day. The way she reacted was exactly what I expected. Excited, supportive, overly interested in how everything would be structured. But what she didn't know was that there was no inheritance. Instead, I was about to pull off the most expensive divorce in history, where the only thing my wife would be walking away with was regret. I spent the next week setting the stage for what would be the most satisfying exit strategy in marital history. Emily had no idea that while she was busy daydreaming about private islands and designer wardrobes, I was working in the background, methodically stripping away every single advantage she thought she had. I started with the finances. Since Emily wasn't exactly a financial genius, just an expert in spending other people's money, she never took much interest in how our accounts were managed. She saw numbers on a screen, she spent them. That was it. So, I slowly moved everything out of our joint account and into an entirely separate one under my name alone. I kept just enough in our shared funds to make it seem like things were normal, enough to keep her comfortable, but not enough to save her when everything collapsed. Then came the house. Technically, I had bought the house. My name was the only one on the mortgage, but in her mind, it was hers too. She had decorated it, filled it with expensive furniture and overpriced decor she swore would appreciate in value. The problem? She never realized that owning expensive things doesn't mean you own the place they sit in. So I sold it. Not in an obvious way. No, that would have given the game away too soon. Instead, I transferred ownership to a trust under my brother's name. If Emily ever tried to fight for the house in a divorce, she'd be fighting a legal ghost. And then came the final touch. I needed to push her over the edge. I needed her to get so excited about our new future that when I finally pulled the rug out, it would break her. So I did what any new millionaire husband would do. I let her plan a dream vacation. Emily had always wanted to go to the Maldives. It was her ultimate fantasy. She used to send me links to ridiculously overpriced overwater bungalows, with captions like, "One day, babe." Now, she finally thought she was getting that one day. I told her to book the most luxurious suite she could find. 5-star resort, private infinity pool, the works. I handed her my new black credit card, the one linked to an account that conveniently had a limit just high enough for her to book the trip, but not much else. She went wild. Within 2 days, she had planned out every detail. Spa treatments, helicopter transfers, champagne on arrival. She even invited her closest friends, the same ones who had ignored me for years but suddenly loved me now that I was rich. Watching her live in the illusion was better than any argument, better than any confrontation. She wasn't just believing the lie, she was investing in it. She started talking about life after the vacation, how we'd start looking at new real estate when we got back, how she wanted to explore investment opportunities, which, in Emily's case, meant buying luxury handbags and calling it an asset. She even mentioned getting a prenup to protect her share. That's when I knew. She wasn't planning to stay forever. She was waiting for the right moment to leave me, but only after securing as much as she could. She had no idea that I was leaving her first. But not just leaving. I was making sure that by the time she realized what had happened, she'd have nothing left to take. And that moment? It was coming soon. I had spent weeks setting up my plan, watching Emily transform into the wife of a millionaire. Or so she thought. She had no idea that the luxury life she was planning was nothing more than a mirage, and that I was leading her straight into the biggest reality check of her life. It was time to pull the trigger. The stage was set. A luxurious vacation to the Maldives, first-class flights, a 5-star resort, and a private overwater villa. Everything had been paid for, on a card that was about to vanish. Emily had spent weeks gushing to her friends about how rich we had become, sending them pictures of the villa, the exclusive services, and the designer outfits she had already pre-ordered for the trip. She thought this was the beginning of her dream life. She had no idea it was the beginning of her nightmare. The day of the trip, I played my part perfectly. We arrived at the airport, checked into first class, and settled in. Emily was glowing. She ordered champagne, leaned over, and whispered about all the amazing plans she had for our future. I smiled. I knew something she didn't. The moment we landed in the Maldives, Emily was on top of the world. A private car picked us up, taking us to the exclusive resort. She was already dreaming out loud about extending the trip, about shopping sprees, about how this was the life she was always meant to have. That's when I knew the timing was perfect. As soon as we arrived at the reception, the staff welcomed us, asked for our reservation details, and swiped my high-limit card. It declined. Emily frowned, laughing it off. "That's weird," she said, looking at me. I shrugged, pretending to be just as confused as she was. "Must be a mistake. Try again." The receptionist swiped again. Declined. Emily started to panic. "Let me try another card," I said, pulling out my second one. The one I knew had been completely emptied out. Declined. I acted confused, checked my phone. Then I sighed, looked at Emily, and delivered the first blow. "There's been a problem with the inheritance. The money is gone." Emily froze. Her smile disappeared. The color drained from her face. "What do you mean, gone?" she asked, her voice now filled with something I had never heard before, fear. I took a deep breath, shaking my head. The bank flagged the transfer. Legal issues. Everything's been frozen. I looked at the receptionist. "I'm so sorry. We won't be able to stay here." Emily lost it. She started scrambling, pulling out her card. One she rarely used, because why spend her own money when she had mine? She handed it over, her hands shaking. Declined. She looked at me, expecting an answer. That's when I gave her the second blow. "I emptied our accounts before we left," I said calmly. "Moved everything. The house? Not yours. The savings? Gone. There's nothing left, Emily." Her entire world stopped. She opened her mouth, then closed it, blinked, shook her head like she had misheard me. Then the final blow. I pulled out one last thing from my pocket. An envelope. "Here," I said, handing it to her. She grabbed it, ripping it open like it contained her salvation. It was divorce papers, already signed, ready to be filed. She looked up at me, speechless. "I booked you a flight back home," I said, keeping my voice even. "Coach leaves in 6 hours. You should probably get going." I turned to the receptionist, gave an apologetic smile. "I'll still be staying, of course. Just a single villa instead of a couple's suite." That's when Emily realized. She wasn't just broke. She was alone. And I was free. I spent the next 2 weeks enjoying the vacation Emily had so eagerly planned for herself. I drank champagne, watched the sunset, and relaxed. All while Emily was scrambling back home, trying to figure out how her perfect life had disappeared overnight. When I finally returned, I had just one more thing to do. I sent her a text. "Hope you enjoyed the trip planning. Best thing you've ever done for me. Take care." And just like that, I walked away, knowing that Emily had nothing left. No money, no luxury, no escape plan. Just regret. Emily had spent years carefully curating the illusion of her perfect life. Married to a man she thought she could manipulate, building a future she believed would be lined with luxury and effortless wealth. And in just a matter of hours, it had all disappeared. I imagined her first few moments of realization after I walked away in the Maldives. Alone. No money. No power. No way to claw her way back. She was no longer the rich man's wife. She was just Emily, the woman who had bet everything on greed and lost. She had no choice but to board the coach class flight I had booked for her. No champagne, no comfortable lounge. Just a long, humiliating flight back home, crammed between two strangers, her entire world crumbling with every passing mile. And when she landed, that's when the real nightmare began. The first thing Emily did when she got home was try to access our accounts. She must have sprinted off that plane, racing to an ATM, desperately praying that I was bluffing. That maybe, just maybe, her personal account had been spared. It wasn't. It was empty. I had drained every shared account before we left for the Maldives. The only money she had access to was whatever loose change she had in her purse. For the first time in years, Emily would have to experience real life, without a safety net. Then came the housing situation. She went back to our house, except It wasn't hers anymore. The locks had been changed, and her name had never been on the deed in the first place. I imagine the absolute horror she must have felt when she saw the foreclosure sign on the front lawn. I had transferred ownership months ago, meaning that as far as the legal system was concerned, she had no claim to anything. She tried calling her friends. This was the best part. All those new friends, the ones who had suddenly loved her when she became rich, gone. They stopped answering her calls, ghosted her the second they realized she wasn't wealthy anymore. She must have felt trapped, panicked, and completely alone. Her final hope was her family. But I had prepared for that too. Before I left, I made sure her parents knew the truth. Not just about the inheritance, but about everything. I sent them screenshots of the conversations I had recorded. The way she talked about wanting a private account in case she needed to leave me. The way she bragged about finally securing her future with my money. Her own mother sent her a text. "We didn't raise you to be like this. Don't call us." That was it. One sentence. Emily had gone from living in a mansion, surrounded by luxury, plotting her perfect future, to being homeless, broke, and completely abandoned by everyone she had ever used. And me? I was exactly where I wanted to be, sitting on a beach, drink in hand, enjoying the vacation she had so eagerly planned, without her. The last message I ever sent her was simple. "Hope it was worth it. Take care." And just like that, Emily faded into irrelevance. She wanted a life of wealth, power, and status. Now she had nothing, and I had never felt lighter. Bye-bye.